again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good collection of stories? Let's do it. What's the scariest story you know to be completely true? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. My cousin picked up a hitchhiker about 20 years ago. Nice enough guy. Cousin was hungry, so stopped at McDonald's, grabbed the hitchhiker some breakfast too. Dropped him off where the guy had said he was headed, no big deal. Next morning, my cousin's watching the morning news and sees that hitchhiker's face. Dude was a serial killer and had killed someone that picked him up. Cousin called the cops and they have him come in. Turns out the hitcher had killed the very next person after my cousin that had given him a ride. He'd killed a few people that had given him rides. That was his MO. They asked the hitcher why he didn't kill my cousin. He said, I'd planned to, but he was a really nice young man. He bought me breakfast. I couldn't kill someone that bought me breakfast. Someone at my school vanished for a week with no leads other than a video of him on a security camera at a McDonald's 2 towns over. A week later, his body turned up in a lake in a bay. They never figured out what happened to him. My father's ship sank in the North Atlantic. Most of his shipmates, including the friend he enlisted with, died of exposure while awaiting rescue. The bodies remained in a lifeboat. Guy I used to work with was murdered and dismembered by his crime partner, who was caught just nonchalantly driving his vehicle around town. A couple of years before, I had had a conversation with him, the murder victim, about concealed carry licenses and how that would work inside a workplace. And he told me the story about his ex-wife was plotting to kill him and how he'd worked out carrying a gun on campus with security, only to be murdered and dismembered by someone else a couple of years later. I was hiking down from doing 2 weeks of trail work in Colorado a few summers ago. The guy hiking up stopped to chat with us about our work and asked if we had seen anyone making the summit while we were up there. We told him that the first summit of the season had been done a few days prior and wished him luck. A friend of mine hiked in that area the next day, and there was a helicopter circling around. The guy had taken the wrong gully back down and died. Still crazy to me to think about. My great-grandfather came home from World War II with shell shock, and my great-grandma refused to sleep in the same bed as him because he would keep repeating, "No, don't kill Tom," which was what he said before he witnessed his childhood friend getting killed. He luckily managed to get therapy and was okay, but wheelchair-bound, so until about 11, where at Christmas dinner, he sat while we all ate completely frozen. My granddad said, "You okay, Dad?" To which he started crying and suddenly let out a very loud and hurt-filled, "Don't kill Tommy," and started crying. I know it's not scary, but it freaked me out. A friend's father just dropped dead while brushing his teeth with his youngest daughter, 6 years old. They never found out what happened, so they figured he had a brain hemorrhage. My wife's neighbor completely lost his shit. He killed his whole family, the dogs, he even shot the houseplants and the fish tank. Edit, since people keep saying silly things, this happened before my wife and I got married. Didn't even know she existed yet. I knew a man who tranquilized his 6 kids and then shot them. When his wife returned home, the house was burning, and while she was agonizing over the kids, he stared her in the face and slit his own throat. Stupid effort, didn't do it right, and survived. In prison for the rest of his hopefully tortured life. His name was Jay Handel. My dad got into a car crash head-on with a convertible with a young couple in it, and the top part of the convertible window decapitated them instantly. He ended up falling into something red, berries, blood, and when the cops and medics showed up, they were freaking out and telling him to lay down. He was actually fine. Witnessing that screwed him up though. Bear knowingly sold HIV-contaminated medication to South Americans in order to not lose profit. They were caught and fined, but their profit was far higher than the fine, so literally infecting and killing hundreds of thousands of innocent people was lucrative. One of my elementary school friends ended up working as a gunman for the Cartel. He was killed this year in a gunfight with the army. Not really a scary story, but it messes me up every time I give it a thought. Just reflecting on how different our paths in life became. I'm actually happy and doing good in life, both emotionally and economically. He, on the other hand, had drug addiction issues, too young, and unfortunately ended up joining with the wrong people in the wrong place. When I was a kid, there was a peeping Tom in the neighborhood. But the weird part is we all knew who he was, a little older guy named Ralph who lived a couple of streets over and smoked like a chimney. We knew because he was caught once early on by a neighbor while on their roof, watching them through the skylight. The neighbor had left a ladder against the house when doing work earlier that day, but after that, he was like a ghost, impossible to catch. People would find footprints and cigarette butts outside windows, smell cigarette smoke, and occasionally see the red cherry of the cigarette glow in the woods. Occasionally, angry dads and teenagers who spotted him out in the darkness would give chase, but he moved like a deer through the woods, and no one could put his hands on him. The cops were involved a few times, and they dragged him in, but it was never for long. Partially, I think, because he had a disabled wife for whom he was the sole carer. He was sort of a neighborhood boogeyman, though thankfully seemed mostly harmless, if terribly creepy. Many years later, there was a rash of break-ins around the neighborhood. People even joked at the time that it must not be Ralph, because we all figured he had copies of everyone's hide keys already if he wanted to go inside. Side note, we later learned that he definitely did have keys to some houses. Anyway, everyone's guard was up. One night, one of the neighbors heard a commotion outside and ran outside to find a stranger laid out in his driveway, beat to shit. They called 911, and when the police arrived, they were able to identify the guy as someone who had previous arrests for B&E and found items from previous break-ins in his vehicle nearby and later at his apartment. As for how he ended up taking a bloody nap in the driveway, he said he was jumped from behind in the dark and never got a good look at the guy. All he remembered for certain was that the guy stunk of cigarette smoke. Well, it might be the reverse of this old analogy from 2008, but you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain, or in this case, live long enough to be the hero? Still not a good dude, but I mean, hey. Worked with kids in foster care. A 17-year-old girl says she got a secret to tell her CASA. Now, we got a rate SWAT team for this shit because 17-year-old girls in foster system, 9 out of 10 it's R. Well, she sits down and tells her family it was Cartel and her cousins were enforcers. One day, when she was like 8, her cousins pick her up and take her out of the desert where they have a 5-year-old boy. They make her choke him to death. I guess he was the kid of a family that owed them money, usually for getting smuggled over. Needless to say, we didn't have a game plan for that shit. The police basically said, no body, no crime, since we had no actual details to identify on, and the cousins she could name were dead, not in the country or already in prison. Poor kid confessed she was forced to murder a child with her bare hands, and the result was nothing. No justice for her, for the kid, for the family, just guess shit happens. A year later, she was 18 and out of the system to face the world she knows will be wildly different than how we all claim it to be, and work. Real scary guy I knew through a mutual friend once claimed he'd wait purposely to murder a rival of his in front of their children so that his legacy of treachery would be remembered. He then went on to do exactly that, shot a man to death at the breakfast table in front of his wife and kids. This one is personal. My family and I were staying in a rental house for a few months because my dad was shit with money. This particular house was owned by a fairly wealthy friend of his who was going through a divorce because his wife had developed a long and nasty drug problem. So, we're staying there pretty cheap. One night near Christmas, I groggily wake up and see a woman wearing a white gown through drawers on the other side of the room. I must have made a sound because she turned and rushed over to me and gently said, "Shh, go back to sleep, little boy." Weirdly, I did. She looked like Liza Minnelli, if that's at all relevant. Next morning, I wake up to my parents acting weird, and I hear one of them make a comment like, "I can't tell what's going on and what's not." For some reason, I didn't connect the dots until I was older. I never told them what I saw. I thought it was a dream. So yeah, the former crackhead owner of our rental house broke in, probably had a key, and I saw her but didn't do or say shit. I was probably 9 or so. I'll tell a very personally scary one. A good friend of mine from high school was driving his perfectly normal family in their perfectly normal minivan on the highway. They were on vacation, headed to Disney World. A pickup coming the other way crossed the center line and hit them head on. He and his 2 sons were killed instantly. His wife and daughter, the youngest child, were critically injured but survived. He was literally one of the 2 or 3 genuinely kindest people I've ever met. Got up that morning all set for a fun family adventure. cruising along the highway, and then the lights out. In an instant, and his wife and daughter left behind to go it alone. Bad things happen to good people, to anyone, and you don't see them coming. As a parent, that's scary. My ex-brother-in-law is John Strutz. He's my ex-husband's little brother. He lived with us from 1998 to 2004-ish. He murdered his wife in 2009. They only found her torso. He disposed of the rest of her, but for some reason he had her torso in his trash can on the curb when the cops came. John was much, much nicer than his brother. Super dumb. The crazy, convoluted story he told absolutely sounds like something my ex would come up with. I can't prove it, but I know in my soul that John probably accidentally killed or grievously injured Kristen during some fight. Panicked, called his brother instead of calling 911. And Mike told him what to do and what to say. John's dumber than a sack of hair and didn't wipe his ass without consulting his psycho but smarter brother. Mike is intelligent but batshit insane and evil as F. John stuck to the story and will die in prison. His brother changed his name and washed his hands of him. I don't know what really happened that night, but I know that the whole hacksaw dismemberment and wild OJ type story sounds way more like my ex than something John would concoct on his own. I'm only shocked that my ex wasn't the one with the torso in his trash can. This happened just this month. Daughter of my school principal was drunk driving and ran over a small passenger rickshaw with an entire family on it. Killed the father, the mother, and 2 children. One kid remains in the hospital until now. School principal's daughter got bailed out and escaped into another country. She's now a fugitive. Worked at a pizza place in a small town. Had that lady come in every Friday and get 2 pizzas for her family and 2 kids. One Friday she comes in like normal, seems normal, chit-chat as normal, grabs the pizzas and heads out. Less than an hour later, she stabbed her 2 kids and husband to death, decapitated them, and when the police arrived, tried to decapitate herself. In jail, she somehow was able to get something sharp and stabbed herself several times, but still survived. Not sure what came of the trial and whatnot after I had moved, but yeah, it was wild. Super nice lady I saw every week, just snapped, I guess. My family literally had a party to die for. We hosted a super late Christmas party in March. We invited a few neighbors over, including an older couple, beyond a few weird comments from the old husband like, "I'm so glad I could have one last good meal." We all had a good time. Everyone kept telling us how great the party and food was. Eventually, the old couple go home a bit earlier than the rest of the guests, and we don't think anything of it. About an hour later, as another guest was about to leave, they come rushing back into the house, yelling about police and medics on our street. Turns out, the husband of the old couple simply dropped dead about 30 minutes after they got home. I guess, to be fair, a big talking point at the party was how he was already basically on his last leg thanks to health conditions, and it was only a matter of time, but we didn't think it'd be that soon. When I was an infant, my dad found out his stepfather was cheating on his mother, my grandma. He confronted them. My grandma was in denial. Dad went out of town for business. Came home to a pile of smoking rubble where his custom home was. He'd built it himself. My dad completely lost his shit. Believed that the house was burned down by his stepfather and went to confront him. Ended up shooting him with a shotgun. One of the pellets ricocheted off his scapula and went directly into his stepfather's heart, killing him almost instantly. As a result, my dad was convicted of first-degree murder and is still in prison nearly 30 years later. The Vampire of Sacramento, Richard Chase. Paranoid schizophrenic, necrophile, cannibal, spree killer in the 70s. Would only enter people's homes if they were unlocked, as that would be an invitation. Here's an excerpt from the wiki. It's extremely graphic, but still leaves out the worst of what he did. Chase broke into a house and shot Teresa Wallen, 3 months pregnant at the time, 3 times. He then had sexual intercourse with her corpse while stabbing her with a butcher's knife. He then removed multiple organs, cut off one of her nipples, and drank her blood. He used a yogurt container to scoop blood from her chest cavity to drink it. He stuffed dog feces from Wayland's yard down her throat before leaving. 4 days later, he entered a 38-year-old woman's home, shot her friend in the head, then her 6-year-old son and 22-month-old nephew. He drank their blood and violated their corpses. When a visitor knocked on the door, it startled him and he fled, taking the 22-month-old body with him. The headless body wasn't found for months. Chase was finally tracked down and caught trying to flee his apartment. Searching his apartment, it was soaked in blood floor to ceiling, the kitchen, refrigerator, and all his dishes and silverware. There were human brains in a dish in the refrigerator. He was decided fit for trial, got the death penalty, but was able to cheek his antidepressants and committed suicide. Responded to a 911 call of a frantic neighbor with a girl that reported her mom was severely injured. Get on scene and find out the ex-boyfriend knocked on the door at 0300. The young girl recognized him and let him in. He said, "Thanks, where's your mommy?" She pointed to her bedroom, and he proceeded to stab her multiple times in the face and chest. He then told the daughter, "Sorry," and slit his own throat. The daughter then ran around the neighborhood knocking on doors until a neighbor answered and called 911. The amount of blood was insane. People have not enjoyed me telling them that my neighbor was dead in his flat for at least 2 weeks and was only discovered when I called the police to request a welfare check, as he hadn't been seen and there was a weird bin juice smell in the hallway. I know this happens a lot, and I've heard many stories worse, but I know this one happened because I was the guy next door.